say. There's a palliative care physician who wrote a book on the 4 things to say to the dying, or the 4 things that the dying need to say. The 4 words that matter most is the name of the book. It's Dr. Ira Bayek. And he talks about the things that need to be said are 4 simple phrases. You can, of course, expound on them, but 1 is, please forgive me. 2 is, I forgive you. 3 is, thank you. And 4 is, I love you. So
Wow.
there's so many different constellations of how you say that, but that's what we're kind of encouraging people to do in those moments. And really, once you sit with those 4 simple phrases, you think, oh, we should be saying that throughout our life, right?
Christine Davies wears many hats. She's an ordained Presbyterian minister, a seminary professor, and a trained spiritual director. She earned her Master of Divinity degree from Princeton, and she has a master's in social work from Rutgers. She's also a beekeeper living on a small farm in New Jersey with her family. In this podcast, we explore many topics, ranging from labyrinth walking to resiliency. This conversation is for everyone who seeks a greater spiritual perspective on navigating life. Christine, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here. And I've enjoyed listening to other people's stories and what they make out of their suffering and the ways in which we are all so resilient. So I presently work as the director of spiritual care, as you just mentioned, and I am also a spiritual director. So I walk alongside people who are suffering and help them to find that meaning in the midst of suffering. And people often find it strange that I do this job or that I'm an ordained Presbyterian minister, because that's not exactly something that was talked about on career day at school or any of those things. And how it came to pass is I grew up going to church. My parents were nominally religious and kind of went because it was the thing to do. But they were surprised that I really took to it and enjoyed the Sunday school and the choirs, even though I can't sing at all. But what I really thought from a young age was that I had a calling and that God wanted me to help the most people. And I thought for sure that was going to be through the field of medicine. My mother was a nurse, so I think she kind of egged this on. And I was interested in going to medical school. Even, as a teenager, I would sit with my Merck Medical Dictionary and my stethoscope, and I was trained as an emergency medical technician and was riding in the backs of ambulances. And while I was there, what really drew me to being an EMT was not so much the minor wound repair I could do with patients, but was really sitting with them, holding their hand while they were in chaos and really worried about what was happening. And sometimes they were saying, why is this happening? And what I felt like I could do is help them to know that they were not alone in it and bear witness to what they were going through. And around the same time, I became a patient and I was in and out of hospitals. And there was a lot of back and forth trying to figure out as a young woman what this mysterious pain I was having was. And there was a lot of medical gaslighting going on, which I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with. And it turned out I eventually got diagnosed with generalized epilepsy. I've had a lot of ups and downs in that journey. Thankfully, my seizures are pretty well controlled at this point in time. I will knock on wood, and I'm well medicated and taken care of. But it was that really sent me into a bit of a tailspin. That was a pretty big bump for me. And I was particularly dismayed with the bedside manner of a lot of the medical staff who were working with me. And I remember being taken out for dinner by the new associate pastor at the church that my family had been attending. And we just talked about, what it was like to lose my license or lose my hair due to some of the medications and to not be able to trust my body and how that was intersecting with my sense of spirituality and where God was in my life. And looking back, I realized I was like, oh, that was spiritual care. that was what I now do with people. I found more renewal in that conversation than I did with, any of my physician conversations. And so that's what led me really on this path to be a chaplain and to be with other people in the midst of new diagnoses. I do a lot around grief and end of life as well, and then some education for others about how to be with others in their own grief. But paying attention to the movements of our soul and the ways in which our bodies can represent something spiritually was really important to me in that time. And that set me on this different path.
What was the renewal that came out of that conversation?
Yeah, it's very simple. And that's what I do now for people, or what I attempt to do now for people. It is just the honoring of how hard this is. Oftentimes what I do with people is help them to name their feelings, right? Because if you can name it, you can
Yeah.
tame it. And normalizing that. I can't tell you how many times I tell patients, like, oh, I hear this all the time. A lot of patients, in this hospital are angry at God, or whatever it is in that particular moment. So I think it was really being listened to and taken seriously, and then being asked, how is this impacting your relationship with God or the divine? And that's a lot of what I do with my spiritual direction clients now who are going through something. I'm like, okay, let's talk about, is this helping, hurting? What are the conversations you are having with God? Or for some that are not, believers in God, it might be, what are the conversations you are having in your head? What are your thoughts toward the universe in this particular moment? So I think those were some of the initial steps that really got me into that greater healing.
Does that type of conversation require some belief in something greater? I mean, the people come to you without any religious background. What sort of evolution do you see in your discussions with them?
Yeah, so it varies, and I like to. It may be helpful for your listeners. I like to make a distinction between, what is religion and what is spirituality. Especially because sometimes when I'm walking into a patient's hospital room and they've never met, I'm not have to tell people, I'm not the church police. I'm not here to, report on your religiosity or not. And for some people, religion is helpful, and for others, it's not. So I define religion as an agreed upon set of rituals, practices, and beliefs held by a community for the sake of communing with the divine. And then my definition of spirituality is much broader, so that I define as how you connect to and explore the world within and around you, and how you make meaning and find transcendence. So for some people, religion is that spirituality. Religion is the way that they're connecting to the world and making meaning and finding transcendence. So it could be someone is Roman Catholic and that is also their spirituality. I find for a lot more people, religion may be a part of it, but is certainly not all of it, is not the entirety of what their spiritual existence looks like. And then for plenty of other people, religion is not a part of it all. And for them, it's helping them to realize they can still have spirituality without the religion. And then for a lot of people, religion has been toxic in their upbringing, or there has been abuse. And so there are valid reasons why they would not want to have anything to do with it. And so it's about how can they approach spirituality from a place not of woundedness, but where they are able to look at what do they believe about the world, about themselves, about their community, about their universe. So for people that say no, I don't believe in anything, where I usually start is what matters most to you. What is it that you value? What keeps your heart going every day, and that's usually our inroad. The thing that there's a theologian, Paul Tillich, who called it your ultimate concern. What is your ultimate concern in this world? And that usually leads us to expanding someone's values and worldviews, and what I would call spirituality, others may call it philosophy or life principles. And so there may be some semantic differences, but I think we're all talking about the same thing.
There's also a movement in educational circles towards something called spiritual psychology.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've run into that. I've interviewed a number of people who have achieved masters and whatnot in spiritual psychology. And I find the idea very interesting because it parallels what you're saying about the need to go within and really explore within to find the answers to the world around you.
Mhm. Yeah, I used to be a therapist. I was a cognitive behavioral therapist for a little while because I did do a master's in social work degree at the same time that I was doing my master's of divinity degree. So before I found exactly what chaplaincy was, I did try on a couple of things, and one of those was therapy. And it's interesting because I remember I did a lot of intakes for a community mental health center, and we had something that was called a biopsychosocial assessment, which is a common thing in medical practices and in healthcare. And recently, I've heard people refer to it as a biopsychosocial spiritual assessment, meaning that we're looking at the whole picture. And so I love the addition of that spiritual on there, but it's really taking into account so many different features of our life. I was just talking to one of the physicians at our hospital the other day who specializes in pain. And she's like, "Oh yeah, pain can be a spiritual experience in addition to, a biological experience and a psychological experience." And so it's making sure that we're paying attention to all aspects of one's care. To me, that's truly holistic.
What is a spirituality in something like, let's say, grief? Grief is a really hard one, and almost everybody experiences it at some point.
Mm-hmm.
How do you
Yeah,
find
well,
meaning?
yeah. So, first, what I like to emphasize with grief is that I have a controversial opinion when it comes to grief. I believe
Good.
that we
I
are
like
all grieving
controversial opinions.
something. So, my controversial opinion is that we are all grieving something at any given time.
Mm,
And people might think, really? Well, nothing major has happened to me lately. I don't think I'm grieving anything. Um, but I have an expansive view of grief. So I believe that anytime there is change in our life,
mhm,
even good change, even happy change, someone's getting a promotion, someone's getting married, there is still loss associated with that change. So for instance, you get promoted, you're no longer, with your colleagues that you were with before. So that is a type of loss. Um, for marriages, I used to officiate a lot of weddings. And I remember a time that a bride's mother was crying at the rehearsal dinner. I'm like, what's going on? Do you not like the groom? And she's like, no, as of tomorrow, I'm not her emergency contact. I'm not like the number one person anymore. So there was a loss associated with that change. And then the more obvious ones certainly come up as well. But if we keep the understanding that anytime there's change, there's loss, anytime there's loss, there's grief. So if change is constant, we are always grieving something. And there are so many different types of loss out there. The ones that I deal with most regularly and what our society talks about most regularly is relationship loss. So dying and death and bereavement around relationships. So that is certainly what I do most of. But there are lots of other losses. There's functional loss. Losing parts of your ability of your body. There's community loss. There is identity loss. Who are you? We see this sometimes with people that retire, right? All of a sudden sink into a depression because their meaning and perspective has changed. There's material loss, right? Like I could lose my bracelet tomorrow, and it may not be a big deal, but if that bracelet is a family heirloom that was given to me by a family member who died, like that is going to bring about a lot of loss. So losses can be big and small, but they are always there. And so I think it's worth talking about grief in so many different ways. And then when we have the bigger losses, a lot of times how we have dealt with maybe those smaller losses in our life will come up because grief can also be cumulative. And so I like to talk a lot about grief because I see so much of it, but also because I think people are blindsided by it a lot of times. They may not know how they're going to respond when they're in the midst of it. And then what I have found is when people try to seek help and support, oftentimes they are met with people who try to get it but don't and can cause more harm than actually help the individual. And I see this true, especially in the realm of spirituality. One of the platforms that I get on a lot is not using religious platitudes
Mhm.
when you are comforting someone who is grieving. And so things like you probably heard all of them, God needed another angel, everything happens for a reason, God never gives you more than you can handle. When we tell those to someone who's grieving, that can really silence their pain and it can set up a relationship with the divine in an awkward way and can lead to more hurt, I have found. So I kind of went off on a grief tangent there, but I get very excited about this because I think that there's a big opportunity for us to do grief differently and for us to care for ourselves and for others differently. And the last thing I'll say about it is really trying to normalize grief so that people don't feel like this shouldn't be happening to me. Something's wrong with me because I can't get over this. As your listeners probably know, and as you know, there's no getting over grief. We move on with it. We move through it, and it does change us. And it's a lot of times people refer to it as the new normal, and having to live into that new normal and all that it entails.
One of my guests had an interesting definition of grief over time. She said
Mm,
when an incident happens initially, it's overwhelming. It's just
mhm,
everything in your life. But as time goes on, you start to rebuild your life, and the grief is always there, but it becomes proportionately smaller.
mhm,
And I think that's a good way to describe it because how do you try to reconcile these events? Can you fully reconcile them? Or is it a matter of just learning to live with the grief?
mhm. I think it's both. So, the reconciliation of events in the chaplaincy world, the term that we use for that is called existential meaning making. So, it's how do I make meaning of this catastrophic thing that happened to me? So, for instance, as I share my story of epilepsy, I've made meaning of that since then to say, oh, this is what led me on this path to do the work that I do. But while I was in the throes of suffering around that, I would not have been able to name any of that. And so that is what I want to advise people of most of all is that it does take time to find meaning. It doesn't happen right away. And it takes a lot of healing and sometimes we don't know at all. There's plenty of bad things that have happened to me that I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know why that was the case. And a lot of the patients and the individuals that I talk to will say, particularly around the loss of a loved one, they'll say, I never want to wish that upon anyone else. And do I wish this person were back in my life? Yes. And now can I see some of the lessons from it? Absolutely. And a common lesson that I hear or meaning that people have ascribed to it is that they feel more deeply now and they are more appreciative of who is in their life and maybe not so concerned with the frivolity of certain aspects of life and feeling as though they are in deeper connection. Um, Others that may not be true. They may go the opposite way. I've had plenty of people that have, come to a deeper spiritual place because of their grief. I've had plenty of people that the opposite has happened. And I always let people know, how you can use your spirituality however you want. For some, it is a help. For some, it tends to be a little bit more of a hindrance.
For the people for whom it's a hindrance, do you think there's an element of denial in that?
It can be. I think for a lot of the ones that I've worked with, what happens is when we're talking about those religious platitudes before,
Mhm.
they've kind of taken those in. And sometimes it's because someone has said it to them, but sometimes it's just because they've grown up, hearing some of those things. And we call that one's kind of internal or espoused kind of theology or belief. So it really goes back to, what is it that they believe about the universe? Does someone believe that the universe is supposed to be fair at all times? And if you're a good person, it's supposed to, reward you and have nothing bad ever happen? Or is this thing that happened to you, you believe it's because, it's a punishment because you weren't living in a certain way. So a lot of what it stems from is what do we ultimately believe? And for those that believe, if they follow that line of thinking, like, oh, this was a test from God and I failed, and that's why my loved one died, or I didn't pray hard enough or
Mm.
have enough faith, which are all things that I've heard, then people will go to being angry at God or saying, no, there is no God. How can I believe in a God that would do something like this? Which, again, I can perfectly understand all of those different beliefs. And I don't necessarily see people over the fullness of time. I do
Mhm.
see people very much in crisis mode in the hospital. And then in my private practice, I do get to journey with people a little bit longer. And so, people may find themselves in different arcs at any given time, and there can be seasons of this as well. Something that we talk a lot about within the Christian tradition, but I think it's applicable to most people, is called the dark night of the soul.
Mhm.
And you may have heard that term before. And it is this period where it feels like all is lost. It's when the rug is kind of pulled out from underneath us and we have no sure footing anymore. And for people that believe in God, they may feel that God has abandoned them or is not answering, any of their prayers. For those that don't, believe in God, it may just be like feeling as though they are completely unmoored and untethered. And a lot of people, when they come out of that, will have a renewed sense of meaning and purpose. But those dark nights of the soul, they call it night, but it can go on for a long time. And it's really more about the obscurity of not knowing what's going to happen and feeling lost in it. And sometimes those dark nights of the soul can start with something, that happens to you, with an event, with a death, with some sort of loss or grief. And other times they just kind of come out of nowhere. And there's no kind of rhyme or reason that you find yourself in one. They are different than depression, clinical
Mhm.
depression. As a former therapist, I have to say that's something else. But sometimes it can feel similar, and sometimes you can go through both at once. But I do see a lot of people that have had a couple of those sometimes in their life.
Are there any steps that you would recommend to deal with the dark night of the soul? And keeping in mind, this can last a very long time. It can take you years to
Mhm.
navigate these sorts of
Mhm.
circumstances.
Yeah, and I wrote an article about it, which might be helpful too. And maybe we can post that. But some simple steps that I have is to, first of all, this is good advice for anyone, is to be gentle with yourself. Whether you're in a dark night of the soul, whether you're in just a confounding circumstance where life is very overwhelming to you, I find sometimes the things that we think in our heads and say to ourselves can be judgmental or further our pain. And
Mm,
so, really trying to lean into, that old adage of what would I say to a friend going through this? How might I treat myself compassionately and not add to the suffering that I'm going through? So that would be the first, really, to be gentle with yourself and how you're speaking with yourself. I also recommend reaching out for support. So anyone that is going through that type of spiritual distress sometimes wind up self isolating
mhm.
because it's hard to be around other people, and I certainly understand that. And especially if the other people you're reaching out to are maybe giving you some of those toxic religious platitudes that are not helpful or expecting you to get over something. Um, and so for that reason, maybe it's not the same friends that you reach out to. Maybe it is, a support group. Maybe it is, a spiritual director, or a clergy or a therapist that's trained, with some of the spiritual practices. And then the last piece I would recommend is, to the extent that you can, to find some spiritual practice that might help ground you. And we could talk more about that. There's plenty of spiritual practices out there that a lot of people don't know about. Some of the common ones are meditation and journaling and gratitude. Those may feel too hard. Um, but if you can find something simple, I was meeting with one of my spiritual directees the other day, and she was very much in a place of overwhelm. So, well, what if you just light a candle once a day? We don't have to meditate for 45 minutes, but
Mhm.
one time a day you light a candle. Like, and that's it. That's all you have to, do for that day. And she tried it and she's like, "Oh, this was helpful." And I did a week of this, and then like on the seventh day, I felt like, "Oh, I can light a candle and I can, read a short devotional, or I can listen to some music that brings me joy." And so, really focusing on what can I do today, and sometimes it's putting things into the micro, and I see that uh, with hope and gratitude as well. Because sometimes when we're zooming out, everything feels overwhelming. Versus, no, what can we control, and what can we tap into just today in this very moment?
Actually, I think that's a really important point because it's only in the present that we can build the future. It's what we do
Mhm.
here, now, today,
Mhm.
and our society is perpetually distracted. We don't
Mhm.
live in the present very well or very
Mhm.
often or at all
Yes.
sometimes.
Yes, we like to distract ourselves. It's hard to be mindful.
Yeah, it actually is. Um,
Mhm.
how can you bring people in addition to these baby steps,
Mhm.
do baby steps lead to bigger steps?
I think they do. I think that they can help be a bridge for us. And the other thing that I like to point out is there are things for spiritual practices that we may already be doing that we can just do with a little bit more intentionality. So you talk about, that the lack of being present to the daily
Mhm.
moment because we are distracted all the time. So, for example, I have I have a lot of coffee every morning. That is part of my daily ritual. But if I have my cup of coffee while I am sitting on my deck, listening to the birds, not checking my phone, and just kind of savoring like the roast of the beans and thinking about my day and what I'm looking forward to, and kind of taking stock of things. That is, one ritual that is more mindful in nature of something
Mhm.
I'm going to be drinking coffee no matter what. Versus if I am drinking coffee while trying to get my kids on the bus, yelling at them like I did this morning because they weren't listening and one of them spilled their cereal. And, by the time I get back to it, it's like half cold. It's all the same act, but I went into it with such different intention. And I say this also to say, I'm not perfect. I can, these things are hard to do. But if there are pockets where we can say, okay, what is something I'm already doing? I don't need to add something on. We don't need to make anyone's to do list any harder. But if it's something that can help them tune into their connection with themselves, their connection with others, or their connection with the larger world, I think those are really important pieces.
Yeah, I think, I've been meditating for quite a while. I don't know, 15 going on 20 years, something like that.
Mm. Yeah, so
And
you know.
when yeah, for me, it's an absolute essential part of my daily practice. But I think one of the things that's so valuable and incredible out of a meditation practice, and that can be through sound, it can be through walking, it can be through savoring your coffee. There are a lot of different ways to approach this. Or you don't have to go to a remote mountain in Tibet and go home for 6 months, you know?
Right.
That might be cool, but that's not what you have to
But
do.
that's the common misconception about what meditation is. Mhm.
Or it's something weird and funky or some sort of
Mm.
cult, which I
Mhm.
find kind of humorous, actually. But I think one of the interesting things that comes out of meditation is better presence, but
Mm.
I think more importantly, you learn to observe your thoughts.
Mhm.
And once you observe your thoughts, you now have the possibility for conscious thought and action.
Mhm.
Before that, you're just reacting.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I liken it to, the ways in which it centers me,
Mhm.
so that I am not someone told me once, I don't know where this came from, but, like a rock in the ocean. Right? And before I started meditating, I would get moved all the time in the waves. I would just be going all over the place and reacting. But the more that I engage in some of these spiritual practices, and have more of a contemplative approach to my life, I'm a rock that is just solid, and the waves can come up and crash against me. And some waves I may feel more than others.
Yeah, sure.
But the fact is that I'm remaining kind of solid in the midst of the storms of life. So I do think it helps us, um, and I think it extends to helping others in terms of their relationships with us. But it does take some intentionality, and I find even the days that I do meditation in the morning, I'm different through that day. If I skip it the next day, I'm like, oh, I can tell halfway
Yeah.
through, something is a little off.
Well, I think the thing about meditation, this is what I've distilled it down
Hmm.
to, at least, is that it's experiential. You
Mm.
experience this expansiveness or peace or whatever you experience. And because it's experiential, you carry it with you.
Mm, mhm.
I mean, you can read I always liken it to chocolate. This sounds a little weird, but
Oh, I'm
yeah,
all about meditating with chocolate, so yeah,
all
I'm
right,
here for
yeah.
that.
But, chocolate, you can read about it till the cows come home, right?
Mm,
There's white chocolate,
mhm,
there's dark chocolate, there's bitter chocolate, there's
mhm,
chocolate with nuts, there's chocolate with coconut, but none of that gives you any idea of what chocolate is like. It's not until you have
mm,
a piece of chocolate, and you
mhm,
experience it that you understand chocolate.
mhm.
And it's experiential.
Yeah.
And I would argue that meditation's the same way. Once you experience it, you start to carry it with you. So,
Mhm.
an annoying driver is less annoying. Maybe it's still annoying, but you have
But
a
you have
little
a
bit
little bit
more.
more patience.
Yeah,
Mhm,
you have a little bit more, a greater ability to cope with the situation.
mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
our graciousness expands.
Absolutely. And I think, I often joke I'm on this earth to learn patience. And I think
Mhm.
meditation is part of that path.
Mhm. Yeah, something else I like to do a lot, which I think some people, would categorize as meditation, which is a similar, exercise. I don't know if you've ever done, morning pages from The Artist's Way from Julia Cameron's,
Oh, yes, yes. Uh-huh.
so
That's
I
really
find that
interesting.
yeah, I find that to be very meditative. So, if your listeners don't know, it's a simple practice, that she recommends a lot for creatives and artists, to handwrite 3 pages every morning, and you're just kind of dumping. It's meant to be stream of consciousness and just kind of flowing from you. So sometimes mine are, my kids are loud, I'm tired, I haven't had my
Mm.
coffee yet, so it can really just be, trivial thoughts, but usually toward the end, I find, oh, mine might actually cross over into prayer, or I might gain a new insight about something. Or afterwards, after I stop, I might even want to keep going. You're not supposed to, you're supposed to stop with that. But I found when I do that throughout the day, I'm more open to creativity or seeing beauty in a different way. So it just, all of these types of practices, I think, can unlock our attention and our awareness in different ways.
I think part of the beauty of that writing exercise is often things that may seem trivial go down on paper, and you look at them and you realize they're becoming a theme. You
Mhm,
may or may not want
mhm,
them to be a theme in your life, but
right?
it exposes your thoughts for you to review. A lot
Mhm.
like meditation, but the act of putting it down on paper can be
Yes.
really profound.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
and
can
there's
really
all
see it.
sorts of journaling, spiritual practices as well that are some are more guided. There's books out there that people can buy that can speak to it. There's ones that focus more on the gratitude journaling. There's more that focus on kind of examining your day or what your hopes are. So yeah, if people like to write, that is a really great way into a spiritual practice.
Yeah, and one of my other favorites are labyrinths. You don't find
Mm.
them in a lot of places, but I find the act of walking a labyrinth is fascinating, actually.
Oh, yes, I love labyrinths. I would love, I haven't yet won this battle with my husband, but I'm trying to, we have a 34-acre property, old hobby farm, and I have a spot where I'm like, that's where the labyrinth needs to go. And I rented one on canvas a few years ago at my hospital, and I put it out kind of in our courtyard. And people are like, what is this maze thing that you put here? But to watch all of these healthcare workers and family members of patients and visitors take it on and walk through it. For those that don't know, it looks like a maze, and there's a couple of different styles of it, but it is meant to be this walk that you do that circles around and then goes inward. And for some people, they are thinking of an intention while they walk. For others, they're praying. For some, they're just putting one foot in front of the other. But the act of doing it can be so transformative. And if nothing else, people are doing it without their phones. It's quiet. They're engaging in the silence. Some are outside. You get to hear, all of the noises of nature. And yeah, I find them to be quite lovely. So I encourage people, and there is a labyrinth society, and so you
Yeah.
can go on to their website and find one near you.
I find them fascinating in that they're unidirectional. They only go in one direction. And
Hmm.
yet you're backtracking and going around and circling. It's such a wonderful metaphor for a thought process and problem resolution, really.
Hmm. And there's lots of bumps in the road of a labyrinth.
Oh, yeah. So you went to Princeton for your your spiritual education. Talk about that a little bit. What comprises a curriculum, and what did you decide to do?
Yeah, so the traditional seminary degree or Masters of Divinity, some people call it the Pastor Master, is a 3 year full time field of study. And they have seminaries where you also have divinity schools. So either way, it's graduate education. But sometimes the focus is a little bit different. So a seminary may be associated with a particular denomination. So, for instance, Princeton Theological Seminary is associated with Presbyterianism. So, I'm a Presbyterian minister, and there's plenty of people who are not Presbyterian that go there. And we had courses. Goodness, I'm gonna have to remember them now. It's been a few years, but such as a lot of theology courses, systematic theology, church history courses. I did not do so well in those. I could not remember the dates of all the various councils. We had to learn Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, as well as biblical Greek. The Hebrew I still remember a little bit. The Greek, my Greek is completely gone. A lot of classes on preaching. My favorite classes, maybe not surprising, were on pastoral care. And so the practice, I think, of ministry. So looking at the lifespan and faith development. Some of them were more specialized as well, looking at addictions or mental health or care with children. And it's funny because I'm now a seminary professor. I'm on the other side of that, so I teach a pastoral care class. And my favorite part of seminary is part of what I teach now as well, was the experiential part. It was the internships. So I did do an internship in a church and was, preaching and doing worship leadership as well as everything else that goes along with those duties. I knew pretty early on that was not for me. I didn't. I like going to church. I don't like being in charge of it. But I did an internship in the hospital as a hospital chaplain internship, and that's called clinical pastoral education, or CPE.
Hmm.
And that's where I really fell in love with chaplaincy. And so that's what I teach now. So that's part of what it means to be a chaplain, is to do 1,600 hours of that postgraduate training in clinical pastoral education. And in doing that, and I was just teaching the class on it last night, and in doing that, a lot of what we have the students look at is their own life story, how their bumps in the roads have led them to be where they are. We're looking at things like countertransference, what's coming up for them when they're with these patients, who are the patients reminding them of, how are they responding. So we actually have the students write out, we call them verbatims. It's almost like a script of what went on between you and the patient. And then we go through that with a comb, a fine tooth comb, and say, okay, well, here the patient was telling you that they're afraid of dying, and you started talking about the weather, right? There's a disconnect there. Like, what
Yeah,
was going
yeah.
on for you that you kind of, left that patient hanging and didn't address, the seriousness of the situation? So that's an extreme example. Fortunately, none of my students do that. But there are all sorts of ways in which we really try to pay attention to, not fixing people, giving people that space,
Hmm.
um, doing reflective and active listening and probing questions. Of course, we're looking at different rituals and different religions and what might come up for people. So that was my favorite part of seminary. And if anyone is listening that's interested in doing an internship in clinical pastoral education, of course they can come to my hospital, but we have a website as well, which is acpe.org, and they list all of these internship programs. And I've had nurses come and do a unit just because they want to get better in their spiritual care. I've had therapists come and they said, we're not interested in being a chaplain, but we want to delve more into the spirituality of being with patients. I have a death doula in mind right now. I've had people in corporate world that were just looking to do something else meaningful, maybe in retirement. So if any of this sounds intriguing, or you feel particularly called to working with people in the midst of suffering, I would invite you to see if there's a CPE program by you.
An inherent part of what you do involves death.
Hmm.
And our society does not want to talk about or deal with death, or aging for that matter.
Hmm.
What are some of the concerns that come up in terms of counseling somebody as they're looking at death?
Mm. Yeah. I would say, and I should preface this by saying I see different types of death within the hospital. So um, the deaths that, in some ways, and no death is easy, but the deaths that can be more meaningful are ones that are occurring when the patient and or the family are expecting it and know what's going to happen. They're still hard, but it's a different level of hard. So I might be in the ICU with a family, and the patient is no longer conscious, and uh, we're going to go through what's called a terminal extubation, which essentially means that the patient is going through usually multiple organ failure. The breathing machine is kind of keeping them going, but once we turn that off, they will die. And so it is a space where we can actually create some really profound moments with that family. It's this weird gift to know when a loved one is going to die and to be there and to be able to surround that person in love. I might, encourage people to talk to their loved one, even if they don't think their loved one can hear them. I say, we never know. And in the back of my mind, really, sometimes I think it's important for their family to talk to their loved one for the sake of the family member, for them to have some of that closure, to say some of the things that we recommend that they say. There's a palliative care physician who wrote a book on the four things to say to the dying, or the four things that the dying need to say. The four words that matter most is the name of the book. Is Dr. Ira Bayek, and he talks about the things that need to be said are four simple phrases. You can, of course, expound on them, but one is, please forgive me. Two is, I forgive you. Three is, thank you. And four is, I love you.